All right, so FinCEN is proposing some new regulations, and they're basically trying to kill off the use purpose of Bitcoin, or at least the privacy side of it. And a lot of people are up in arms about this. And the way I think about this is very, very different to the way most people are thinking about it. And I know what some people are going to say. Some people are going to say, "You're not a real Bitcoiner. You're not this. You're not that," and that's absolutely fine. I accept that. I accept that criticism because I come from a different world. I come from real estate. I come from stocks. I come from gold. I come from all these other traditional finance assets. So, sometimes my perspective is slightly different to the quote unquote freedom loving, libertarian, hugging a tree perspective when it comes to Bitcoin and other things, by the way. It's not just this. So, from my perspective, anyone who's actually surprised about this is silly, because if you don't think that they're going to try and control where this funding goes and whether and really the knowledge of what is being funded, you're silly in my mind, right? Like, I can understand the need for privacy. I can understand the need for all these things, but when it comes to a government wants to see what is being transacted. A government wants to see privacy not being utilized to fund terrorism and fund all these other things that particular government is against. And so, of course, they're going to create laws like this. Of course, they're going to come in and try and say, that utilizing privacy tools like coin joining services, how these work is very, very simple, right? It's like you take your Bitcoin, you take some other Bitcoin, you mix it up, and now you don't know whose Bitcoin is what and where it went, right? Now, there's already analysis tools to sort of defeat these things, but governments don't want to see privacy in money because they want to know where the money is going and they want to know who the bad actors are in the game. Now, of course, majority of people are not bad actors, but the bad actors have enough liquidity through coins like Bitcoin, et cetera, to figure this out, right? To figure this out, they have enough liquidity to make it worthwhile figuring this out. Because the worst thing you want is, let's say the U.S. government has deemed a country a terrorist organization. They don't want funding going to that to that country. They don't want that. Why would they want that, right? If you were the empire, you wouldn't want that either. So this is completely expected. This is completely expected. Completely what I would say is normal. But I can understand why Bitcoiners are against this, and I can understand even from myself when I read the regulation why it is an attack on Bitcoin and the core function of what Bitcoin is supposed to be. Now, here's the part that I would be focused on from my perspective, rather than what everyone's focused on. Attacks like this are going to come. There is going to be restrictions on how you can move money around. You can't just move your stocks around. You can't move liquidity around on stocks. And of course, we all know that the U.S. dollar is much more powerful as a tool to fund organizations around the world than Bitcoin or anything else. But of course, these tools are going to come because they want control. The U.S. empire is built on control over capital. It's not built on ownership of the capital. It's built on the control of that capital. So the way I would be thinking about this is this. It is becoming more and more urgent for you to actually acquire your Bitcoin from services like any exchange, and then moving it off onto a cold storage solution, onto a hard wallet, right? Because if I was the US empire, I would also do this. What I would do, remember, Bitcoin is the first time that you have a form of capital that cannot be controlled within borders. So the US has to do as much as they can, and every country really has to do as much as they can to try and control the wealth of that Bitcoin within its borders, because that's what allows the country to maintain its position. So, of course, there's going to be choke points created in flows to an asset like Bitcoin. Of course, they want an asset like Bitcoin being held through an ETF, which is controlled within U.S. borders. Of course, they want, services like coin join services to not be used because they want to keep that capital under lock within the jurisdiction that is the current empire. So all of that is completely normal. All of that is completely expected. And here's what I would say to you. What I would say is you need to move off your ass and get to one Bitcoin as fast as possible because these attacks are not going to stop. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more and more restrictions on buying Bitcoin and moving it off an exchange to put into your hardware wallet so that it's in complete control. Bitcoin is the first time that we have a bearer instrument of this that can scale to the size that Bitcoin can scale to. So of course there's going to be attacks. Of course there's going to be people trying to figure out how we control this thing and maintain and not have knowledge about where it goes. So none of this is surprising, but the one thing that you need to focus on is getting the Bitcoin in your possession. It's the first time we have a bearer instrument asset that can scale to $100 trillion. It's the first time we have a bearer instrument asset that the poorest people in the world can invest in until the asset is worth $100 million, right? $100 million would equal $1 per Satoshi, right? The poorest people in the world can afford that, right? This is money for everyone. So, you know, this is completely expected, but you should not be focused on FinCEN. You should be focused on how do you take possession of this asset before stuff like this comes into play, right? Because if I say it openly, if this was me, and if this was me trying to decide how do I protect the US dollar empire, I'd say, right, you get to buy Bitcoin within the ETF and you get to take advantage of the price speculation, but there's no way you're taking possession of that asset because you can move it around without me knowing, right? And of course, it's not exactly like that because there's Bitcoin analysis companies and stuff like that that can figure out where everything went. So this is coming. This is normal. This is expected. You just have to decide how quickly are you going to get off your ass and get to one Bitcoin and have possession and custody of it. That sounds scary for a lot of people, which is why a lot of people are waiting for the ETF to come around. Okay? So while it does sound scary, while that thing is there, the only thing I would say is, as I said, to OB in the podcast that I did with them, you just got to grow up, right? If you're sitting around complaining about, it's too scary to do this, my friend Ben, BTC Sessions, has a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching you exactly how cold storage works on every single new wallet that comes out. You should be spending your time learning about how to take possession of the only asset that you have the opportunity to take possession of. Which is why in 2021, when I first entered be talking about Bitcoin in public space, even though nobody knew me then, I was the only one saying, yeah, an ETF is coming because it's essential. It's the only way that the US is going to be able to control the asset within its borders in terms of ownership, right? The US empire is not trying to focus on trying to own everybody's assets, right? It's focused on if you want to generate wealth within the United States, you own the asset and you control it within the borders of the United States. You can do anything you want to do with an asset as long as the United States controls it, right? And that's really what's happening here. This is not some death to Bitcoin thing going on. This is just in a way to control the asset and inspire more ownership through mechanisms of control that keep the asset controlled within US borders. And a lot of people don't have an issue with that because the US is the best and safest capital markets in the world with strong regulation to protect property ownership, right? Now, there's going to be people that hate me saying that, right? Because they're going to say, oh, okay, what about this tax, that tax, etc., etc. And taxes is another worry too. If you have Bitcoin that can just be sent around the world, we can't tax it, right? We don't know who owns it. We could just send it around the world. We can't tax it. So taxes is going to be another one as well. But again, most of the next buyer of Bitcoin that's coming in, I keep talking about this new buyer of Bitcoin, doesn't care about any of this because they're holding it as an investment asset, right? They're not holding it as a freedom-loving technology lover. So, you just got to know the lay of the land. And the lay of the land is very, very simple. I cannot, as the empire that's in power, afford to have people have control over an asset that they can move around the world and me not know who it's going to. So therefore, I have to control it. And the only way to control it is to inspire people to use the ETF and use tools like the ETF and other institutional services to own and control that Bitcoin, right? They can have the price exposure, but they can't have the bearer instrument of the asset. And that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. It's the first time you can actually take bearer possession of an asset that can scale like this. You can have bearer possession over watches, you can have bearer possession over your bricks of gold, but as you saw, even people like Peter Spina, who is sitting around telling you that he's a gold guy, is basically saying that, you know, he would sell his gold if he wanted to move it, convert it to Bitcoin, and then convert it back to gold. Closet Bitcoiners, that's all they are. So as far as this FinCEN thing goes, that's my thoughts on it. These attacks are going to happen. You just have to get used to it. And of course, your goal is to own the Bitcoin before any of this can happen. So despite FinCEN coming in, there are still only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.